folks, it's Dr. Gilchrist, and I am here today to give you some guidelines for your 8th Sniffy assignment. So one thing that I will mention is that the 8th and the 9th assignments are going to look very, very similar to each other. So this week we are going to be looking at exercises 39 and exercises 41, looking at discrimination, and then you're basically going to do the exact same thing the following week, but you're going to be looking at generalization. Now, probably out of almost all of the Sniffy assignments that we've done this semester, these ones are going to be a little bit more involved than you've probably had to do in the past, just because you're going to have to collect some data and do various generalization tests. But the basic idea behind me making this video is to give you a very simple idea of how to set this up so that you will have less problems with it and you'll also go in knowing what to expect. So for this one, I'm going to show you how to do exercise 39, and then I will kind of tell you how exercise 41 is going to work. It's going to be a little bit different, and I will make sure to explain the differences between the two. So to go ahead and start, the first thing that you're going to need to do is you're going to need to open up a file where you've actually trained Sniffy to bar press. So there's my good old bar press file. You want to make sure that it is a continuous reinforcement schedule here. Now, remember that the very next thing that we're going to do is our good old save as. So we're going to make sure that we're not overwriting our bar press file here. So I'm going to go ahead and call this exercise 39, tone discrimination. And what's going to be really important here is S+. So we'll kind of talk about this more in class. Let me see if it'll let me do a plus. Tone discrimination S+. It does. So one thing that I will kind of mention is that there is a distinction between S+ and S-. So here, a tone being present indicates to Sniffy a certain tone will indicate that if Sniffy presses the bar, he will get rewarded. S- means that if the tone is absent, Sniffy will not get food. So our S+ is basically an excitatory stimulus. It means that we're going to see an increase in that bar pressing behavior, and S- means that during these instances, these are inhibitory. And we'll kind of talk more about what these mean as we start talking about stimulus control. So I've already kind of done my save as. The next thing we're going to do is we are going to go ahead and click on to design operant conditioning experiment. So we're going to go back to our experiment here. Now here's what we're going to do. So you need to follow discrimination learning. So here is what we're kind of doing. So our tone on learning here is basically 2 kilohertz, and then none is our S-. So Sniffy is being trained to learn that a 2 kilohertz tone or a 2000 hertz tone is associated with getting rewarded whenever he presses the bar. If the tone is not present, Sniffy will not get rewarded. So this is an excitatory stimulus. This is an inhibitory stimulus. So here's how this is basically going to work. So you are going to basically do some discrimination tests. Now those tests are basically what we're going to be doing next week when we look at generalization. But at least for today, we're going to do a very simple discrimination. So I'm going to go ahead and click apply. And we're going to go ahead and isolate Sniffy because that tone is bugging me. All right, I am going to go ahead and show Sniffy. So here's what I want you to take a look at on the cumulative record. So there are a couple of things that I want you to notice. So first of all, take a look at our cumulative record here. So this is once we have initiated our our generalization tests. So in this instance, you can see that the tone is associated with a high amount of responding, and then these blank intervals, maybe you get a little bit of responding here and there, but it's certainly at a much lower rate. So Sniffy is being reinforced on a discrimination schedule. Responses are reinforced in the presence of the S+ tone, and no reinforcement is given in presence of the S-. So Sniffy will learn over time to only respond when he hears the 2 kilohertz tone, and he will learn not to respond when that tone turns off. So I'm going to go ahead and let that tone play for a little bit. Now, one other thing that I want to show you is our discriminative stimulus response strength mind window. Now, take a look at this. So what we're kind of looking at here is a generalization gradient. So we're looking at response strength. Okay, that is getting a bit much. So I'm going to go ahead and isolate Sniffy while we do this. Now I'm going to show Sniffy. Hopefully it doesn't pop back on. That tone is a little hard to think through. So feel free to isolate for a little while, and as you can kind of see, we're still getting those responses. But I want you to pay attention to this gradient right here. So Sniffy in this instance, and I'm going to go ahead and pause that so that I don't have to hear the tone. So we have a generalization gradient. Now next week with experiment with Sniffy lab number 9, you're actually going to recreate this generalization gradient in this instance. But here, one of the things that's kind of interesting that we'll kind of talk about with stimulus control is that when you have tone on as your S+ and tone off as your S-, you actually end up with this generalization gradient that we can test later on. So one of the things that you can see is that the closer that the tone is to the original tone that Sniffy was trained on, in that instance, the closer it gets, the more responding we get. The farther away that this tone is from our originally trained tone, 2 kilohertz, the less responding there is. So what's interesting is that all you need is a tone on, tone off presence versus absence to basically create this generalization gradient. And like I said, next week, you're going to actually create that gradient through the use of generalization and discrimination tests. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go back to that bar press file, and I am going to very briefly show you how to do exercise 41. So exercise 41 is tone on S- here. So this one, 39, is tone on S+. That means that when the tone is on, Sniffy will get reinforced if he presses the bar. Tone on S- means that if Sniffy presses the bar when the tone is present, nothing happens. So it's becoming an inhibitory stimulus. So we're basically reversing these operations. So I'm going to go ahead and I am going to open, and I do wish to save. We're going to go back to our bar press file. And once again, we are going to do our save as. Remember, that is the most important thing that we do. So this is X41, tone, discrimination, S-. So now we're going to do the exact same thing that we did before. So we're going to go to design operant conditioning experiment. Now here's where we're going to go a little differently. So here our S+ is no tone. Our S- is now going to be 2 kilohertz. So I'm going to go ahead and apply that. And I'm going to go ahead and isolate Sniffy so that we can see this work. There we go. File, edit. Experiment, show Sniffy, and we're going to pause. So go ahead and take a look at this data. Once again, notice that we are getting the exact opposite of what we saw before on the cumulative record. We saw a very, very high rate of responding with Sniffy when the tone was present versus when it was absent. Here, we're getting the reverse. When that tone is present, there's very, very little responding, but notice that when the tone is absent, there is a lot more bar pressing behavior. We see a higher rate of responding. And again, what I'd like you to do is pull up the DS response strength, our discriminative stimulus response strength mind window. As you can kind of see here, the gradient looks a little bit different here. But what we should see is that the closer we get to that tone, the tone that we were trained on, the less responding we should get. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to isolate Sniffy and I'm going to unpause. Let's see if this gradient changes. And notice that the more that we do this, you're going to see that we're going to see less responding at the tone that Sniffy was originally trained on. And the farther away we get from that original tone, the more bar pressing we see. And again, with exercises 40 and 42 next week, you're going to actually create this generalization gradient with those generalization tests. So this is basically all you're going to need for your assignment this week. Make sure that you turn in a picture of your cumulative recorder and your generalization gradients for both of these. Remember, that's going to be in your DS response strength mind window. But hopefully you have what you need. I will talk a little bit more about this today. And I will also talk about this on Tuesday as well. Remember, we don't have class on Thursday. And I can kind of bring this up in class if you are going to need a little bit of an extension on this because you don't quite understand. I'm willing to do that for you. So this is all I really have right now. Thank you very much. And I will have a video for you next week to teach you how to do generalization tests. Bye.